Beautiful pixel graphics? Enthralling turn-based combat? It's 2023? Welcome to Chained Echoes. How's it? Naba here. Beginning development in 2016 and coming off a successful Kickstarter campaign in 2019, Chained Echoes released in December of 2022. It was created and developed by Matthias Linda, who tried to capture his experience playing RPGs as a youth and how he remembered it. While some of the backgrounds and the music were outsourced, the story and gameplay was crafted entirely by this heroic soul, an impressive feat given the breadth of the release. On its surface, Chained Echoes looks like any other JRPG, with the familiar setup you would expect from something like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, which has your characters traversing the land, unraveling the story, and along the way encountering foes who must be dispatched in turn-based combat. As you progress through the journey, though, you realize there are some key changes to the tried-and-true formula that Linda makes, which make it both refreshing and a lot of fun to play. You begin your journey as Glenn, thrown right into the thick of things aboard an airship as you and the mercenaries you're partnered with head onward to attack and reclaim an overthrown kingdom at the behest of the unseated rulers. As you near the city, you load up into your sky armors. These are flying mech suits that give the user immense power and special abilities. Battling through the air defenses, though, is a losing proposition, and falling to the ground, you and your partner must continue onward on foot without the assistance of the armor. If you make it through the remnants of the enemy forces to the end of this trial, our heroes are greeted by a famous adversary and the Opus Stone. After dispatching this fiend and with comrades urging him on, Glenn destroys the Opus Stone, or, in reality, something known as the Grand Grimoire, which has the capacity to level cities, but spare those few immediately around it. The devastation wrought by this weapon lays the foundation for a peace amongst the warring kingdoms and sets the stage for the events to come. As you can see, there are a few moving pieces going on in this brief introduction, which are fleshed out in much more detail further into the game. I didn't expect this amount of depth of storytelling in this medium, but I was happily surprised. There are numerous different characters, all with different motivations, and watching them traverse the stage and observing it as it all plays out was compelling. It's not just the main story that draws you in either. On board the ship you begin on, and throughout the game as a whole, there are NPCs who have tons of neat tidbits about the events that are going on, or their own story, which adds some nice flavor to the world if you want to explore it. Linda also adds in puns and comedy throughout, which, well, often a little cheesy or self-aware in their humor and elicited many a chuckle from me. Some of the curse words, though, fell a little bit flat. I'm not completely sure why, perhaps my imagination of the period the game is set in, or maybe the use of them in a pixel game, but they did take me out of it whenever they arose. This is most definitely not something that hurts the game, as they're infrequent and they're easily forgotten as soon as they're uttered, and you move on to the next exciting revelation. After the incident with the Grand Grimoire, the game begins to introduce you to some of the other characters. Here Linda shifts you around a little bit as you start out playing as Glenn and Kylian, and all of a sudden they're gone, and you're thrown into a different duo. This may sound jarring as I describe it, but the freedom of exposition gained by shifting perspectives was really nice, and allowed room to introduce and meet the new characters at a good pace and with sufficient depth. Now, of course, Chained Echoes isn't just one big visual novel, and the encounters with your foes are one of the most important parts of the story. Throughout the world, there are enemies who appear on the map which will attack if you get too close. This is unlike any JRPGs that I've played, as in Chained Echoes this is not done by a random encounter where you step somewhere and all of a sudden your screen screws up and you're in a fight. There are naturally some enemies that are unavoidable or that you need to defeat if you want to get to a certain area to obtain some treasure, but there are many trash mobs in the game that can be just bypassed if you aren't in the mood to deal with them. Sometimes these enemies can't be avoided though, and combat is a must. I don't know about you, but one of the things that always bothered me in JRPGs is that it never felt like I needed to use the full arsenal of my skills when I was in combat. This doesn't speak for every game, but in my experience, I always look to use the most powerful of my abilities, or the one the enemy has a weakness to, in order to win the fight. And sprinkled amongst these attacks would be a healing spell to make sure the characters didn't dip below 0 HP. This took out some of the strategy involved, and it felt like I was doing the same fight over and over again with different enemies, with the result determined not by my smarts, but by whether my party hit the power threshold necessary to overpower my foe. Not to say this is boring. There are many excellent and enjoyable games in the JRPG lexicon where deep tactics don't necessarily come into play, and the sheer joy of a level up or more powerful ability increasing your damage, combined with a story, is sufficient to sate one's thirst for a fun experience. The JRPG genre, like any style of game with a fun loop, can always be improved upon, and Chained Echoes really makes some strides here. The first and most obvious change from traditional JRPGs, and the one that contributes the most to the diversification of actions, is the implementation of the overdrive bar. The bar is split into 3 sections, from left to right, beginning with yellow, which is the standard base setting and has no effect on damage or TP, which are tech points, and have a similar function to mana in other games. Green, or overdrive, where your attacks do more damage, punishment received is reduced, and abilities cost less TP. And red, overheat, which increases TP costs and damage taken. This is where you don't want to be. Doing actions like attacking and ability casting, or getting hit by foes, moves the bar to the right. Since you don't want it over there, the challenge comes from managing your abilities to keep the bar in the overdrive section, where you gain the most benefits. One way to achieve this, and move the bar left, is forgoing an attack and defending for a turn. But of course, this isn't always feasible, and doesn't have a huge effect on the bar position, so Linda gives us some more options. Once the bar enters the green overdrive section, an ability type from among the 6 options of buff, debuff, healing, magic, attack, and utility will appear on the top left corner of the UI with a number signifying how many more turns remain until a new type is swapped in. If you use an ability of this type, a new one will take its place, and your overdrive bar will shift to the left by a not insignificant amount. In addition to this, you have the option to perform an ultra ability after the power bar fills, which greatly decreases overdrive, switch out one of your combatants, use one of the character's abilities that actively decreases overdrive, or employ an overdrive reducing item. The main impact of including the overdrive mechanic is that the player must now think more strategically about which spells to use and when, with consideration given to the bar's position. Do I use my weaker ability to prevent going into overdrive? Do I pass on damage this turn? Do I risk a turn without a heal in exchange for more damage immediately at the risk of getting hit hard the next turn? These are some of the variables you must consider when engaging with the combat system in Chained Echoes. And if things aren't going well for one of your characters battling on the front line, or if you need a different type of spell, all you need to do is swap to one of your reserve characters during their turn. While this is unavailable if the frontline character dies, the swapping mechanism further increases your tactical options while at the same time reducing the overdrive bar, as mentioned before. It's lots of fun figuring out which characters you want to be paired together as starters and reserves and how that plays into the overall way you approach the battlefield. One of my less favored characters had an ability which paralyzes the enemy, while another, whom I wanted in the starting roster, did massive damage to paralyzed foes, so I would swap the alternate to cause the paralyze effect, and swap to the damage dealer the next turn. Finding these types of combinations to maximize the efficiency of your unit added some really neat complexity to the battles. After your strategy is successful and your vanquished foes bequeath their loot, you can continue on about your business, knowing that you'll be fully prepared for the next encounter, as all health and tech points replenish after every battle. I was a little skeptical of this coming from grinding games where the player always needed to be sure to stock up on consumables to keep their party alive through long stretches in the forbidding wilderness, but this was an excellent quality of life change to the genre. Management of health between fights does, to be fair, add another element to consider, but there isn't much one has to think about to successfully manage it. Relieved of these constraints, you're able to focus on the more enjoyable parts of the game without realizing halfway through an area that you need to go back to town and restart because you forgot your supply of Phoenix down. Even better is that if you do see you're overmatched and you're not in a boss fight, you can run away with a 100% chance to succeed, preventing you from getting bogged down in combat that you can see from the start will not be possible to emerge from successfully. If you do die though, you'll be presented with the option of restarting the battle, after being allowed to make changes to party composition and which abilities are active, or reverting to the previous save. This was great, since you didn't end up having to backtrack or repeat areas over and over again. Of course, if you choose to restart the battle, it can sometimes result in a few sets of trial and error before successful conclusion. But this was never too punishing, and I think there was only one occasion in the game where I was completely unable to defeat a foe after repeated tries and needed to search around for more powerful items and allocate some skill points to abilities in the struggle for success. I mentioned skill points, but in Chained Echoes, leveling up is not the usual process of gaining XP until you reach the next number. There are two facets here. First are the Grimoire Shards, which are gained from defeating powerful foes. Grimoire Shards allow you to choose one new skill from your character's list of skills to learn. These abilities are grouped into areas of action skill, passive skill, and stat booster. Earlier in the game, this is simple to manage, although there are many choices, but later on it becomes a juggling act, as you can only have 8 action skills and 3 passive skills active at the same time. I tended to lean towards maxing out the passive effects from the stat booster, since those have a guaranteed impact without taking up a skill slot, but I think it would also be perfectly possible to focus on action and passive skills, swapping them in and out depending on the requirements of the next engagement. And this is where skill points, the second element of leveling up, make their presence felt, as characters gain them for the action and passive skills that they're using, but you also receive some that you can spend, allowing some more customization to the strength of different components of your arsenal. And if that wasn't enough, characters can gain additional skills via the use of classes, whose emblems you can find in special shrines throughout the world. These abilities can only be slotted into the class skills section, meaning only 2 are available at a time, but they also add some more options and allow you to further customize your character. One of the really great points about leveling as a whole is that the characters who are in the party fighting gain the same skill points and effects from the Grimoire Shards as those who aren't participating. This completely eliminates the issue with some games where only active party members would get experience, leaving those who you use less stunted and unable to participate, forcing you into a grind if it was ever discovered later in the game that one of these runts possessed an essential quality that you overlooked initially. The only case where you end up having a remotely similar situation in Chained Echoes is if the items of one of your characters are significantly weaker than their partners. Weapon and armor can be found in chests throughout the world, and these improve the stats of the users to a surprising degree in some cases, and securing more powerful items is required to go through the game. Luckily, you can upgrade items in 2 ways to make even obsolete pieces sustainable for a time. The first is clean and simple, where you use the materials from downed opponents to level up your item up to 2 times. The second, though, is applying crystals found throughout the world to your items. I tried the crystal system early in the game because it looked neat, but soon tired of it due to its unessential nature and the amount of time involved in the combining process. In essence, you can combine 2 crystals in order to make a more powerful one to slot into your weapons or armor, but there are a number of stats here, such as the crystal level, size, and its purity, which need to be accounted for and affect the outcome of the combination. It felt needlessly convoluted, and the add-on inconvenience of having to unsocket each crystal when you found a new item made it take more time than it was worth. Now, the combat system already described would usually be more than enough, but Linda adds a second form of combat in the shape of the Sky Armors. While the basic principles are generally the same, there are some differences which make it a compelling addition. You're limited to 4 heroes when using Sky Armors, so the swapping mechanic is eliminated, and furthermore, ultimate abilities are not possible using the mechanical suits. But in place of these is the gear system. At the beginning of the fight, a Sky Armor sits at Gear 1. Here, all effects are normal and actions affect the overdrive bar the same as when on foot. In Gear 2, you enter a Berserk type state where you deal and receive more damage. Your skills cost more, but the overdrive bar moves to the left when taking an action. With the final shift, you move to Gear 0 and can no longer use skills, but any action recovers a large amount of TP with the overdrive bar remaining static. All of this takes place with a different looking overdrive bar. No longer is there a green overdrive section. The middle of the bar is now taken up by the yellow normal status and bookended by the red overheat. Naturally, it becomes somewhat of an art to be able to hold the bar in the middle through well-timed gear shifting without slipping into the overheat sections, especially against multiple foes. Another fun consideration is the timing with which your team goes into Gear 0, as losing skills eliminates your ability to heal without consuming an item. My usual course of action was to begin with 2 characters in Gear 1, with the other 2 immediately shifting into Gear 2 consuming their TP, so the downtime with all 4 on Gear 0 would be limited as much as possible. More so than Sky Armor, the on-foot fighting is where you'll do the majority of your battling, but the interspersion of the Sky Armor combat into the flow effectively broke up the combat style so that I never became sick of either routine really. This variability in the flavor of the game also shows itself in the environments, and I think that Chained Echoes is definitely better served by using the 2D pixel art than if Linda had opted for 3D realistic designs. Proceeding through open green fields, along to murky woods and onto alien dreamscapes, Chained Echoes is beautiful to look at and quite charming. The artwork is crafted delightfully with loads of color and atmospheric notes, and the creativity of the world is a sight to behold and accompanied by a great musical score to tie it all together. This quality doesn't deviate throughout the game, and it is always exciting to enter a new area and discover the biomes you've yet to tread. Throughout these lush areas bursting with personality, you'll find new characters to join your cause. Finding these individuals, who you can recruit to your group and send to your outpost, is a neat side activity, and will provide you with different benefits such as getting free materials, new shops, and the ability to see how many chests are missing on each screen. The latter of these helps with another activity to strengthen your squad, the reward board. Essentially, this reward board is an in-game reward for completing achievements. And the reward board has you killing X of a certain enemy in a certain location, defeating a unique boss, or collecting all chests in an area, and giving you small rewards for these efforts. More potent, though, is the rewards for creating unbroken chains of achievements on the board, which give access to important items in the game after you reach set lengths of the connected chains. Chained Echoes is rooted in the old world of JRPGs, harkening all the way back to the Nintendo Entertainment System, and which have persisted through to the present day. The game is quite long, perhaps a little bit too long, although if this was your only option, it would be a great game to traverse through, finding every little nook and cranny where someone is hiding or glimmering treasure is hidden. The combat system, while not completely revolutionary, is a massive improvement on the tried and true formula with unique and thoughtful twists, which in turn gave the game a great depth that is sometimes lacking in the genre. I never felt like there was a time where I just coasted through a fight and found that I was always thinking not only about my current action, but a few moves ahead. The combat system alone isn't the only standout though, as the presentation and story building of the world are both excellent, with amusing and tragic stories. The screams of those souls are still echoing in my nightmares, sprinkled all throughout the adventure, which is a little unexpected given the tropes that are so easy to get bogged down in with a game set in a fantasy universe like this. And the cherry on top is some neat side quests, activities, and puzzles. A couple of the ball puzzles certainly made me question my sanity. All of these components combine in Chained Echoes, where Matthias Linda succeeds in setting a standard for the JRPG genre 4 decades after its inception. Hats off.